One baby lived. One baby was stolen, and a mother's love was all that could stop a lifetime of lies. The hospital clock struck the hour twice. Not loudly, but with the soft, indifferent click that reminds the world life continues even when someone is breaking. Miriam Grace lay stretched thin on the narrow bed, her body emptied of strength, her breath coming shallow as if the air itself had turned heavy. Sweat clung to her skin, cold now, settling into her bones. She had given everything she had left. 2 cries filled the room. "I, fragile, alive." The nurse lifted the babies gently, one in each arm, and for a brief moment, just a heartbeat, the world softened. Twin girls. Their faces were identical, eyes sealed shut, lips trembling as if they were already searching for something they did not yet understand. Their fingers brushed, instinctively curling toward one another, a silent promise written before language. Miriam wept, not loudly, not with relief, but with exhaustion so deep it felt older than her bones. "Thank you, God," she whispered, her voice breaking on the word thank. She did not have the strength to lift her arms. She only turned her head enough to see them. She named them in her heart before anyone asked. Alara. Ing. 2 lights. 1 breath. 1 hope. Down the corridor, another room held a different silence. Naomi Bell lay staring at the ceiling, her eyes wide, unblinking. The baby placed in her arms did not move. Did not cry. Did not resist gravity. Stillborn. The word echoed in the room like a verdict. Her scream never came. Instead, something folded inward. Grief did not arrive like tears. It came like heat, tightening her chest, sharpening her thoughts, stealing tenderness from her blood. A nurse murmured apologies. Another adjusted the sheet. Naomi did not hear them. Her mind was already elsewhere. She thought of Miriam, her best friend, the woman who had shared meals, secrets, prayers, and unknowingly a husband. Naomi turned her head toward the door. Down the hall, faint but undeniable, she heard it. A baby crying. Then another. Twin cries. Her lips trembled, not with sorrow but with something darker. "She has 2," her mind whispered. "And I have none." Back in Miriam's room, the doctor spoke gently. "Rest now. You've been through a lot." Miriam nodded weakly. She had. Long before this night. Her husband had not been there when the contractions worsened. He had answered her calls with impatience, his voice distant, distracted. "Just breathe," he'd said earlier, as if pain obeyed instructions. Now he was still absent. No flowers. No hands to hold hers. No whisper of pride. Only the twins beside her. Her heart ached, not for herself, but for them. She feared the world she had brought them into. She feared the kind of love that disappears when a woman grows tired instead of beautiful. Her eyes closed slowly, her strength finally surrendering. She did not see Naomi standing outside the glass wall later that night. Did not see the way Naomi pressed her palm against the window. Did not see the hunger in her gaze. Miriam slept. And in her sleep, destiny stood exposed. 2 babies alive. 1 woman broken. Another hollowed by loss. The moment passed quietly. No thunder. No warning. Just the beginning of a crime the world would not discover for years. Grief did not leave Naomi Bell room to breathe. It pressed against her chest like a hand that refused to lift. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed long after the nurses thought she had fallen asleep, the still body of her child wrapped in white at her side. Her fingers traced the blanket again and again, as if repetition might teach death to reverse itself. Nothing happened. Her tears stopped first. That was the moment grief changed shape. Naomi stood slowly, her legs unsteady, not from weakness, but from resolve forming where sorrow had been. She walked to the window and looked down the hall. Light spilled from one room. Laughter, soft, relieved, drifted through the air. Miriam's room. 2 babies crying in imperfect harmony. Naomi closed her eyes. This world does not give equally, she told herself. It takes from the quiet and rewards the patient. She was done being quiet. Later that night, when the ward thinned and exhaustion dulled the staff, Naomi found the nurse. The powerful one. The kind who spoke with certainty, whose clipboard carried weight, whose presence ended questions before they were asked. Everyone trusted her, not because she was kind but because she was sure. Naomi did not beg. She did not cry. She spoke carefully, each word measured. "I've lost my child," she said. I will not survive losing everything. The nurse looked at her for a long moment. Not with sympathy, but with calculation. Money changed hands without sound. Names were not spoken. A door closed. And in that quiet, a line was crossed. The nursery lights hummed softly. 2 living infants lay beside one another, wrapped in identical blankets, their breaths shallow, unaware of the decision approaching them. The nurse moved with practiced ease. One baby was lifted. Just one. Her cry rose briefly, sharp, confused, before being hushed against fabric. In her place, the nurse laid the still body Naomi had carried. The swap was quick, efficient, unremarkable. Paperwork followed. Dates adjusted. Identification bands replaced. Medical records rewritten with the authority only hospitals possess. Ink replaced truth. No alarms sounded. No one questioned the nurse when she walked down the hall carrying a child. Authority silences doubt better than threats ever could. Back in Miriam's room, her body stirred faintly, but she did not wake. Her spirit sensed absence, a hollowness opening where something had been. But she was too tired to name it. Naomi took the living child into her arms for the first time. The baby's warmth startled her. For a moment, just one, her face cracked. Then she held tighter. You are mine now, she whispered, and I will never let the world take you from me. Somewhere in another room, a mother slept beside death, believing it was her child. The hospital returned to silence. Shift ended. Lights dimmed. Morning prepared itself. And destiny, split cleanly in two, began its long memory. Miriam's eyes fluttered open as the morning light carved pale lines across the hospital ceiling. Her arms ached. Her chest ached. Her soul ached. A nurse approached, calm, measured, and authoritative. She carried the infant wrapped in a soft blanket, one small body fragile and warm. Your other baby didn't make it, the nurse said gently. Her voice was almost too soft, as though the words themselves might shatter under their weight. Miriam blinked. The words echoed like a bell tolling in a hollow hall. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But her body refused to obey. She had no strength left. Her husband, the man who should have held her and wept with her, was absent. He had long since retreated behind excuses and whispered frustrations, leaving her to endure alone. And so Miriam did what she had always done. She accepted. Not because she understood, not because she believed. Because she was conditioned to endure. Pain had been a constant teacher. Ignore it or it will consume you. Accept it quietly or it will leave you shattered. Smile for others even when your bones feel hollow. Her maternal instinct stirred faintly. A flicker, a quiet alarm in her heart. Something was wrong. The baby in her arms was warm, alive. But something in the way the nurse had spoken, the way the silence lingered, didn't sit right. Miriam pressed the blanket to her chest and swallowed the suspicion. I cannot fight anymore, she thought. Not now. Not with nothing left. Her tears fell softly, almost secretly, against the cradle. She kissed the baby's forehead. Whispered words of comfort she could barely feel. I will protect you, even if the world betrays us. Outside the room, the corridors of the hospital continued as if nothing had happened. No one noticed Naomi, no one noticed the nurse, no one questioned the authority that had silently altered fate. And Miriam, lying back against the thin hospital pillow, felt her heart tighten in a way she could not name. A pain that was not entirely loss, not entirely intuition, but the quiet presence of truth buried in silence. She had survived this long by enduring. She would survive this too. But some truths she did not yet know would not be silenced. The small apartment smelled of boiled rice, soap, and worn fabric. Miriam Grace moved quietly, each step deliberate so as not to wake the baby asleep in the worn crib. Her hands were raw from work. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. Her heart was heavy with a grief she had learned to carry alone. Ilara, the living twin, the one stolen from the hands of fate, was curled beside her, tiny fingers brushing the blanket as if seeking a connection with the universe. Miriam did not hesitate. Every ounce of herself went into the child. She saved scraps of money to buy books, even if her own stomach went empty. She taught manners and grace even when the world mocked her clothes. Discipline was firm but never cruel. She knew that structure could save a soul when love alone could not. Faith became their refuge. Prayer whispered over meager meals, over blankets stitched with care, over hope she could barely feel. Clothing, worn, threadbare, patched where holes had opened from too many washes. Food, simple, often less than needed because the mother gave herself first to the daughter. Dignity, compromised in the eyes of neighbors and strangers, but preserved fiercely in her eyes. Rest, sacrificed, always sacrificed so Alara would grow strong. Miriam became more than a mother. She became a shield. A living wall against a world that had betrayed her. "I have nothing," she whispered one night, pressing her hand against Alara's chest. "But this," her fingers pressed gently on the baby's tiny heart, "is everything." Even when neighbors gossiped, even when her husband's absence was a wound that festered, Miriam stood. He could not protect herself. She could not protect her past. But she would protect the life she held in her arms. Alara slept, unaware of the sacrifices woven into each quiet breath of her mother. And yet, even in the darkness of poverty and betrayal, Miriam's heart burned fiercely, defying the world with the simplest act of rebellion: unconditional love. Serafina Bell never knew hunger. Her crib was polished, her blankets soft, her walls painted in colors brighter than sunlight. She had toys her tiny hands could barely hold, dresses her feet could barely fill, and every whim fulfilled before her lips could form it. Yet she was fragile. Doctors frowned at her charts. Hospital rooms became a second home. She vomited without reason, cried through the night, and slept poorly even under the heaviest down blankets. Tests found nothing. No infection. No genetic flaw. Nothing explainable, and yet her body seemed to resist life itself. Naomi hovered over her constantly. Every spoonful, every word, every glance was measured and controlled. Yet the love was hollow, efficient but empty, a simulation of care that could never fill the gaps left by a mother's instinct. "Hold still, Serafina," Naomi would say softly, though her eyes were distant, distracted by ambition, by envy, by the world beyond her child. The girl never felt safe in her own home. She was surrounded by comfort but starved of connection. She did not know the warmth of maternal sacrifice. She did not hear whispers of protection whispered over her sleeping form. She did not feel the steady heartbeat of a mother standing guard over her soul. And though she never understood it, she carried a quiet ache. A hollow that no toy, no medicine, no silk dress could fill. Deep inside, in a way only twins could feel, Serafina mourned the life she did not know. The life she had been torn from. Every cough, every faint fever, every unexplained pain was a reminder that some wounds cannot be stitched with gold. Invisible trauma. Silent suffering. A life lived in shadows, even in the brightest of rooms. Miriam had learned to read the silence in her husband's voice, the sharp inhale before he spoke, the glance that lingered too long on someone else, the absence of warmth in the simplest words. At first she excused it. He must be tired, stressed, perhaps worried about work. But the excuses stacked like stones. He found reasons to leave the house. Meetings that never existed, calls that lasted hours, sudden trips with vague explanations. He gaslighted her, twisting small complaints into her own guilt. "I can't believe you think I'd do that. You're imagining things again, Miriam." Affection vanished like a winter sun behind clouds. His hand no longer brushed hers. His voice no longer softened when he entered the room. And Miriam, accustomed to enduring, took the blame. "I must have done something wrong," she whispered nightly to the ceiling. "I should have smiled more. I should have spoken less. I should have been enough." Even her anger was silenced by habit, by exhaustion, by the belief that love required endurance over confrontation. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. She noticed Naomi laughing a little too freely around him. She noticed the attention her friend drew, subtle but persistent. But Miriam said nothing. And then one morning she returned home from the market carrying groceries, and the house was empty. No note. No explanation. No apology. Her husband had packed his things quietly, like a man leaving nothing behind but a hollow echo. He had started a new life. Openly, with Naomi. The shock struck Miriam dumb. She called. She waited. She called again. No answer. She reached out to family. Silence. The world seemed to close in around her. Not because she had lost him long before, but because she had trusted endurance to protect her, and it had failed. Common mistake revealed. Silence instead of communication had allowed betrayal to grow unchecked. Tolerance instead of boundaries had invited manipulation. Endurance mistaken for love had been the very thing that enabled abandonment. Yet even in despair, Miriam remained resolute. She held Alara close. He whispered, "If he cannot love us, we will love ourselves enough for both of us." And with that she took the first step toward rebuilding a life that was hers to define. Without him, without Naomi, but with the child who was her only unbroken world. The letter arrived on the morning of Alara's 6-month birthday. Its crisp envelope was official, stamped with the city's seal. Miriam tore it open with trembling fingers, hoping against hope it was a mistake. It was not. The paper stated in cold, unfeeling words that her home, the place she had poured every scrap of her being into, had been sold. She sank to the floor, the weight of it pressing her chest flat. Naomi had done this. He could not believe it. Not fully. Not yet. She had trusted Naomi, her best friend, the woman she had shared secrets, laughter, and prayers with for years. And yet, this betrayal had come through the very door she had opened for her, using access given in friendship, in trust. Her husband knew nothing. And if he had known, perhaps it would not have mattered. He had left, abandoned them. She had no partner. No protector. Miriam called her lawyer immediately, desperation clawing at her throat. "There must be some way to stop this," she whispered over the phone. Days of frantic calls, emails, meetings, and signed papers followed. Every effort failed. Legal loopholes, access, and authority had conspired against her. The house was gone. Her hands shook as she looked down at Alara, tiny and curious, crawling on the bare floor. The 6-month-old, unaware of the magnitude of her mother's loss, reached for a torn corner of fabric. Miriam's heart broke further. Family members of her husband, those who should have been allies, offered nothing. Silence. Excuses. Refusals. She had lost them all. Her home. Her husband. Her best friend. The stability she had fought so hard to create. And yet she could not collapse. She held Alara to her chest. Felt her heartbeat. Felt her tiny pulse against her own. "We have nothing," she whispered, "but we still have each other." That day Miriam walked out of the house she had built with love and sweat. Her arms carried not just a baby, but a resolute will to survive. Betrayal had been completed. Friend, husband, and home, lost. But her spirit, though battered, remained unbroken. The sun had barely climbed over the city skyline when the auditorium doors opened. Guests arrived in anticipation, their shoes clicking across polished floors, their whispers carrying assumptions of wealth and status. The school expected a parent who reflected the glittering success of their child. A car, a uniformed chauffeur, a suit that radiated power and influence. Instead, Miriam Grace stepped through the doors. Her shoes were modest, her dress simple, her hair carefully combed but without adornment. She carried the air of someone who had been broken, yet she walked with dignity that no wealth could buy. Alara followed, radiant in her academic regalia. Her eyes scanned the crowd with quiet confidence, as if daring the world to judge her. One by one the awards were announced. Alara's name rang out. Applause erupted. 1 award. 2 awards. 3. The room fell silent for a moment in disbelief. Whispers ran through the crowd. Who is her parent? Her manners, her poise, her brilliance. Where did she come from? Miriam did not correct them. She let the perception remain. Because truth was not in the applause. It was in her heart, in every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every empty meal endured to make this possible. As the ceremony continued, her gaze caught a figure across the room. A man, sharply dressed, whose expression faltered as his eyes settled on her. Naomi's former fiancé. He froze. Recognition dawned, mingled with shock and disbelief. Miriam felt it too. A flicker of past connections, a silent acknowledgement that their worlds were entangled in ways neither could yet speak. She held Alara's hand a little tighter. We have nothing, she thought, but today we have everything. The awards concluded, the applause still echoing, and Miriam allowed herself a small, private smile. For once, the world had seen her daughter's brilliance without the filter of wealth, and in that recognition she felt vindicated. And in that brief moment, Miriam understood. Even without money, even without support, she had raised a life that could shine brighter than any fortune. Miriam did not expect to see him again. The man stood across the auditorium, polished, composed, his eyes betraying faint recognition as they met hers. For a moment, a flutter of relief passed through her. She had lost contact with Naomi years ago, and in that absence hope for any connection, any reconciliation, had dimmed. "Hello, Miriam," he said, his voice careful, measured. She smiled softly, nodding, a polite warmth that hid the whirlwind of questions she had buried. Could he have answers? She wondered. Or would he only confirm what she feared? The conversation was brief, yet each word lingered. He revealed something unexpected. Naomi had left him while pregnant. Not just left, she had walked away entirely, no explanation, no farewell. Miriam felt a strange twist in her chest. The timeline didn't match her husband's absences, the nights he had disappeared, the excuses he had woven so carefully. Suddenly memories surfaced. The nights he vanished, claiming long work hours when he was unreachable. The subtle lies, the contradictions she had excused. The quiet emotional withdrawal that had once seemed like fatigue or stress. Every instance, once tolerable, now felt like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. She did not confront him. She did not demand answers. She did not challenge her husband or his family. Instead, Miriam turned inward. She leaned on what had always carried her through, faith and motherhood. She pressed her hand to Alara's small back as the girl clutched her award. "We will rise," Miriam whispered silently. "We will rise no matter what has been stolen." The cracks in the past did not break her. They were reminders, subtle yet undeniable, that truth had existed in silence all along. And now she would let it inform her strength rather than consume her sorrow. Serafina lay on the sunlit hospital bed, the pale sheets tangled around her tiny frame. Another round of tests, another day of unexplained weakness. The monitors beeped with steady rhythm, indifferent to the child who had been fragile all her life. Then he appeared. The boy who carried a family name heavier than gold, whose presence seemed to shift the air around him. He walked quietly into the room, eyes soft but observant, aware of the fragility in the space he entered. The moment their eyes met, something subtle shifted. A pause in her wheezing, a slow inhale that filled her chest without effort. "Hello, Serafina," he said gently, seating himself beside the bed. His hand hovered uncertainly, then rested lightly over hers. Her small fingers curled around his instinctively, as if they had always known him. The nurses observed, exchanged glances. The doctors ran charts, repeated tests, whispered theories, but no explanation sufficed. When Lucien was present, her body seemed to find a rhythm that science could not name. Time itself appeared to bend. Hours passed unnoticed as they talked quietly. He asked about her favorite stories, her dreams, her fears. She whispered secrets, small truths that no one else had ever heard. Laughter rose between them like a fragile shield, keeping illness at bay. Her spirit, once heavy with sickness, now felt light. Her cheeks flushed with color, her chest expanded with energy she hadn't felt in months. "It's like, I can breathe," she whispered one afternoon, looking into his steady eyes. "Even when I'm weak, I feel strong when you're here." Lucien smiled, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Maybe it's not me," he said softly. "Maybe it's just what we remember, what blood carries. You've been waiting for something familiar, and it finally arrived." The doctors scratched their heads. Charts made no sense. Vital signs normalized. The pattern defied medicine. But Serafina knew the truth in her bones. Love, pure, untainted and deep, had become a healing force. Not by magic, not by medicine, but by connection. When they held hands, sickness paused. When they laughed together, strength returned. When they shared secrets, her spirit soared. It was a bond beyond explanation. A bond older than memory. Blood remembers what the world forgets. And in that remembered truth, two children, one sick, one strong, found a love so profound it began to rewrite fate itself. Serafina had always known her body better than the doctors did. She knew it in the way her breath shortened without warning. In the way her strength arrived in flashes and disappeared just as quickly. In the quiet exhaustion that lived behind her smile. So when the doctors spoke in careful voices, "Sooner than expected, prepare yourselves," she did not cry. She only nodded. She was 10 years old, and she understood something the adults around her refused to name. She was dying. That afternoon she asked for one thing. Not machines. Not prayers spoken too loudly. Not pity. She asked for Lucien. And she asked that her 10th birthday be only for the two of them. The room was cleared. No nurses hovering. No parents pacing the hallway. Just a small cake on the side table, untouched, and sunlight slipping through the curtains. Lucien sat beside her on the bed, trying not to show the fear that had been tightening his chest for days. "You're quiet," he said. Serafina smiled. Not weakly, knowingly. "Come closer," she said. He did. She reached up and brushed her fingers through her hair, pushing it back just enough to reveal the small, faint mark at the front of her head, something she had never explained, something no one had ever asked about. "This," she said softly, "is where I always felt like something was missing." Lucien frowned. "Missing?" She nodded. "Like half of me was looking for the other half." Then she laughed quietly. "It sounds silly." "It doesn't," he said immediately. She looked at him, then really looked at him, as if she were memorizing his face for another lifetime. They lay back against the pillows, their heads touching, foreheads resting together. Serafina raised her hands and formed a small shape with her fingers. A simple love sign she had invented when words failed her. "If I ever forget how to speak," she whispered, "this is how I'll talk to you." Lucien swallowed. "You won't forget." She didn't answer that. Instead she spoke about him. She told him his fears, how he pretended to be brave, how silence scared him more than pain. She told him his secrets. The way he carried loneliness like a responsibility, how he believed love was something people eventually lost. She told him his destiny, not in grand prophecies but in quiet truths. "You're stronger than the family you come from," she said. "You'll lead but not with fear. And when you feel alone," she added gently, "it's because you're remembering me." Tears slipped down his face. "I don't want to remember," he said. "I want you here." She turned her face slightly, their temples touching. "I am here," she said. "And I always will be." They stayed like that, two children, heads resting together, breathing in the same rhythm. For the first time in her life, Serafina felt no pain. No weight. No sickness. Only joy. Only rest. She laughed softly at something only she could hear. And then, without struggle, without fear, she slipped away. Minutes passed. Lucien didn't move. He thought she was sleeping. He smiled, still crying, still holding his head against hers. "Serafina," he whispered. No answer. He called her name again. Nothing. Then louder. Still nothing. The scream that followed shattered the hallway. Parents ran in. Doctors followed. Nurses froze. Lucien was shaking her gently, begging, his voice breaking the room open. "She said she'd stay," he cried. "She promised." But Serafina was already gone. Peaceful. Still smiling. And in that moment, something inside Lucien fractured beyond repair. Her sickness had never been just illness. Her death had never been random. She had been dying since the day she was separated from what her soul remembered. And now, having loved fully, having laughed freely, having given everything she came to give, she was finally whole. The moment Serafina took her last breath, the world did not announce it with thunder. It arrived quietly. Miles away, in a small room with peeling paint and thin curtains, Ilara jolted awake from sleep as if someone had struck her chest from the inside. She gasped. Her heart hurt, not sharply but deeply, like a wound opening without a knife. "Mama," she whispered, already running. Miriam was seated on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to her chest, tears streaming without warning, without explanation. "I feel it too," Miriam said, her voice breaking before Ilara could speak. They did not ask questions. They did not reach for logic. They joined hands. Mother and daughter knelt on the cold floor, sobbing, praying through confusion, calling on God without knowing why, only knowing that something sacred had shifted. Somewhere something precious had been lost. And blood, though separated, had remembered. In another house, filled with wealth and quiet terror, chaos erupted. Naomi's second daughter clung to her mother, screaming, begging, shaking her shoulders. "Wake her up," the child cried. "Please wake her up." But Serafina did not wake. She lay still, her face peaceful, her small body finally free of the illness that had haunted it since birth. Naomi collapsed beside the bed, realizing too late that everything she had stolen had come with a cost she could never repay. Lucien did not cry. Not then. Not when the doctors confirmed it. Not when his parents wept. Not when the house filled with voices and grief. Something inside him closed. Not hardened, sealed. From that day forward, Lucien became quiet in a way that frightened people. He stopped asking questions. Stopped smiling. Stopped reaching. He grew tall. He grew disciplined. He grew distant. Women became invisible to him, not from bitterness but from absence. He never looked at them twice. Never flirted. Never flirted. Never touched. If he spoke to a woman, it was business. If she crossed a boundary, she was dismissed without emotion. Love for him had already been lived and buried. Power became his language. He learned strategy, patience, silence. He built reputation the way others built families. Fear followed his name, not because he sought it but because he did not care to soften himself. Only one man understood him. His grandfather. An old man who had seen wars, betrayals, and the cost of loving deeply. One night he found Lucien sitting alone, staring at nothing. "You're not empty," the old man said quietly. "You're carrying something heavy." Lucien didn't respond. "You loved once," his grandfather continued. "That means you can rule without cruelty. If you survive this." Lucien finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "She was my beginning." His grandfather nodded. "Then make sure she is not your end." Lucien carried her memory like a wound that never healed, but also like a compass. And in that silence, in that grief, a air was formed. Not by ambition. Not by hunger. But by love lost so purely that it reshaped destiny itself. She grew up in Serafina's shadow. Not because she lacked beauty. Not because she lacked comfort. But because she lacked what could not be taught or bought. Presence. From the time she was old enough to understand desire, Callista wanted Lucien. Not because she loved him, but because Serafina had. She watched the way his silence bent toward her sister. The way sickness softened in Serafina's presence but never in hers. The way rooms shifted when Lucien entered, and how they never shifted for Callista. She mistook proximity for destiny. Lucien never did. He felt nothing. Not anger. Not temptation. Not curiosity. When Callista spoke, he listened politely and forgot immediately. When she touched his arm, he stepped away without explanation. When she smiled, he returned nothing but distance. That absence enraged her. Callista inherited Naomi's nature in ways Serafina never had. Entitlement disguised as affection. Jealousy masked as devotion. Possession mistaken for love. She believed wanting something meant it belonged to her. And Lucien, untouchable, powerful, unreachable, became her obsession. She watched him grow colder, stronger, more feared. And she told herself a lie that hardened with time. If I can't be loved by him, I will be chosen by him. But Lucien did not choose women. He chose order, control, distance. Love for him was a completed chapter. Callista sensed it, and hated Serafina even in death for it. She studied Lucien's routines. His silences. His rare moments of vulnerability. She mirrored softness when it suited her. Sharpness when it didn't. Naomi saw it but never stopped her. Because mothers like Naomi do not correct obsession. They cultivate it. And so Callista grew into a woman convinced that what destiny denied her, he would one day take. Not knowing that love taken by force always returns as ruin. Cien was not looking for anything that night. The city moved below his office windows. Cars, lights, distant sirens. Life continuing without permission. He stood still, jacket untouched on the chair, hands resting on the cold glass. He had learned to live like this. Present but untouched. Then he heard it. A voice. Soft. Unforced. Clear in a way that cut through noise rather than rising above it. He froze. Not because it was loud, but because it was familiar. His chest tightened instantly, sharp and unexpected, like a memory striking bone. He turned slowly, scanning the floor below where staff moved about. The voice came again, laughter this time light and brief. His heart began to race. It wasn't her voice exactly, but it carried the same rhythm. The same calm certainty. The same way it settled instead of echoing. His breath shortened. His mind did what it had learned to do for years, shut down. But his body betrayed him. His hands trembled. A sudden pressure built behind his eyes, panic rising without permission. He stepped back, gripping the edge of his desk as images surfaced uninvited. A hospital room. Sunlight through curtains. Two heads resting together. A small hand forming a love sign. He closed his eyes. "No," he whispered, barely audible. The voice sounded again, closer this time. Lucien moved. Not with authority. Not with command. With urgency. He walked quickly down the corridor, ignoring greetings, ignoring the presence that usually parted crowds for him. His heart pounded louder with every step, as if warning him not to continue, and urging him forward at the same time. He reached the lobby. The voice was there. He stopped abruptly. A young woman stood near the entrance, speaking to the receptionist. She wasn't facing him. Her posture was modest, composed. Nothing about her demanded attention. Except the voice. It anchored him to the floor. For a moment he couldn't breathe. This was impossible. She turned slightly, enough for him to see her profile. Lucien felt dizzy. Not recognition but connection. Something deep, buried and sealed, cracked open without permission. He didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead he stepped back into the shadows, watching her leave, memorizing the cadence of her steps, the quiet grace in the way she moved. When she passed through the doors and disappeared into the street, the panic subsided, replaced by resolve. For the first time in years Lucien wanted something. Not power. Not control. Answers. He returned to his office and spoke to his security chief without emotion. "Find her," he said calmly. "No pressure. No harm. Just information." Pause. "And be precise," he added. "This is personal." That night Lucien did not sleep. He sat alone, staring into darkness, replaying the sound of her voice over and over again, not as obsession but as recognition. Something he thought was buried had spoken back to him. And this time he would not run. Lucien did not expect to see her again so soon. He told himself the search would take time, that distance would protect him, that preparation would dull whatever had been stirred. That was how he had always survived, by control. But fate did not wait for permission. The next morning the lobby of his building was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that hides turning points. Ilara stood near the reception desk, holding a thin folder to her chest. Inside it were documents, academic records, recommendations, a scholarship referral. She had been invited for an interview connected to a foundation tied to Lucien's company, one that quietly sponsored exceptional students from disadvantaged backgrounds. She had hesitated before coming. Places like this made her aware of the space she did not take up. Glass walls, polished floors, people who moved like they belonged. Still, Miriam had kissed her forehead that morning and said, "Go. You don't know who God will use." Ilara waited patiently, speaking softly to the receptionist, unaware of the presence that had already stopped moving behind her. Lucien stood a few steps away. This time he did not hide. He saw her fully now. Not as a voice. Not as an echo. But as a woman. She was not dressed to impress. Clean lines, modest elegance, quiet confidence. Her beauty did not announce itself. It invited attention only if one was listening closely. And Lucien was listening. His chest tightened, not with panic this time but with something slower, heavier. Recognition. She turned. Their eyes met. The world narrowed. Lucien felt it immediately, not attraction alone but a pull that bypassed reason. Something ancient, familiar and dangerous in its certainty. Lara felt it too. Not fear. Not confusion. A stillness. As if her body had paused before her mind could catch up. She began, then stopped, uncertain why her voice felt different when she spoke to him. Lucien took a step closer, his gaze never leaving her face. Then he saw it. At the front of her hairline, partially hidden, faint but unmistakable, a small birthmark. His breath left him sharply. It was identical. Same place. Same shape. The mark Serafina used to touch when she spoke about feeling incomplete. Lucien's hand twitched at his side. He did not reach for her, but the restraint cost him. "You're here for the foundation," he said quietly, grounding himself in the sound of his own voice. "Yes," Ilara replied. "I was told to submit these in person." She lifted the folder slightly. Her fingers trembled. Lucien noticed everything. The restraint in her posture, the discipline in her speech, the softness that did not beg to be noticed. He understood something then, something that unsettled him more than grief ever had. This woman had been raised carefully. Deliberately. "By love. I'll take care of it," he said. The receptionist looked between them, surprised, but nodded. Lucien gestured subtly. "Walk with me." They moved side by side, not touching but close enough that awareness replaced space. The air between them felt charged, restrained, intimate without permission. "You have a calm about you," he said after a moment. "It's rare." Alara glanced at him. "So do you. But yours feels guarded." A corner of his mouth lifted despite himself. "People say that." She hesitated. "They don't usually mean it kindly." "No," he admitted. "They don't." They stopped near the elevator. Lucien turned to face her fully now. Up close, the resemblance struck deeper, not in features but in essence. The way she held silence. The way she watched him without challenge or fear. "You don't know me," he said, softer now. "I know," Alara replied. "But it feels like I should." The words landed between them, unprotected. Lucien felt something inside him tilt. Not possession. Not hunger. Recognition. He reached out slowly, not touching her face, but brushing her hair back just enough to confirm what he already knew. The mark. His fingers stopped short of skin. "I'm Lucien," he said, as if the name carried weight she needed to hear. "Alara." He nodded, committing it to memory. Something sacred passed between them in that moment. Unspoken, undeniable. Seduction did not come from intention but from restraint. From the way he stepped back instead of forward. From the way she stayed instead of fleeing. As the elevator doors opened, Lucien knew one thing with clarity that frightened him. This woman had not come into his life by accident. And whatever she was meant to awaken in him, it had already begun. Lucien did not plan the visit. It happened the way real turning points do. Suddenly, without ceremony, without strategy. One moment he was standing in his office, the next he was giving an address to his driver that felt older than thought. Alara's home. The moment he stepped inside the neighborhood, something in him softened. Not weakened, opened. The house was modest. Clean. Lived in. The kind of place shaped by care rather than money. As he crossed the threshold, his chest filled with an unfamiliar warmth, and for the first time in years, Lucien smiled without meaning to. Inside him something stirred. Serafina, still carried, still remembered, felt joyful. He could not explain it. He did not try. Miriam welcomed him with polite surprise, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes kind but cautious. She did not know who he truly was, only that he was important to her daughter and respectful enough to remove his coat before sitting. She spoke softly, offered water, adjusted the curtain to let in light, and then, without knowing why, she made a small gesture. She joined her fingers together briefly, forming a simple shape. A love sign. Lucien's breath caught. It was the same gesture Serafina had made in her final hours. The room tilted slightly, not enough to fall, just enough to feel. Truth pressed against him, not proven, not spoken, but recognized. Alara noticed his stillness. "Are you all right?" she asked. Lucien nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I am." And for once it was true. Everything moved quickly after that. Not recklessly but inevitably. Lucien began to live again. He called more. Showed up without reason. Sat longer than necessary. Listen. No woman had ever sat beside him in his private car. Now Alara did. The car that once stayed parked, reserved for silence, for power, for distance, now moved through the city with the two of them alone, music low, conversation gentle, pauses comfortable. Lucien drove himself. He had not done that in years. His family noticed immediately. His mother felt it before she saw it, an ease in his voice when he called, a warmth long absent. His grandfather smiled quietly, saying nothing, knowing better than to interrupt a return to life. But not everyone felt peace. Callista watched. She watched Alara sit where no woman had ever been allowed. Watched Lucien lean in when Alara spoke. Watched the way his eyes followed her without effort. She monitored schedules. Asked questions disguised as concern. Counted days. Measured distance. Something old and dark stirred in her. Because she recognized the energy. The same energy that once belonged to Serafina. Lucien, unaware of the watching eyes, felt lighter with every visit to that small house. The laughter. The humility. The quiet strength in Miriam's presence. Something in that home aligned him. Something in Alara anchored him. And somewhere beyond logic, beyond proof, beyond memory, Serafina rested. Not gone, but complete. The neighborhood was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Miriam noticed it first, not with fear but with the kind of awareness that comes from years of living alert. A dark car sat parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted deeper than necessary. It had been there too long. He paused by the window watching. At exactly 6:42 p.m., Miriam reached for her phone. "Ilara," she said when her daughter answered, keeping her voice calm, steady. "What time did you say you'd be home?" 7, Ilara replied. "I'm on my way now." Miriam swallowed. "There's a car parked outside," she said carefully. "I don't like it. Stay on the line with me." Ilara slowed her steps. "I see it," she said after a moment. Miriam's grip tightened on the phone. "Do not come straight in," she instructed. "Walk toward the gate. I'm coming out." At that same hour, miles away, Lucien stood in his mother's living room, an unfamiliar place after years of distance. The visit had been quiet, fragile, overdue. He had just sat down. Outside, Miriam stepped onto the walkway just as Ilara exited the car that had dropped her off. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. The dark car's door opened. Miriam didn't think. She moved. A gloved hand emerged from the window, gun raised, not shaking, not rushed. The first shot rang out. Miriam turned fully, stepping directly in front of her daughter. The impact drove the air from her lungs. The second shot followed, sharp, final. Miriam staggered but did not fall immediately. She wrapped her arms around Ilara, shielding her body completely, her knees buckling only after the car sped away. "Ilara," she whispered, breath fading. "Don't move." Then she collapsed. Ilara screamed. Hands shaking, she pressed down, crying out for help, calling emergency services with a voice that barely sounded like her own. At the exact moment the second bullet struck Miriam, Lucien's chest seized. A sudden, violent pressure crushed his breath mid-sentence. His hand flew to his heart. The room spun. "No," he whispered, eyes unfocused. His heart rhythm faltered. Once, then collapsed into chaos. Lucien hit the floor. Shouts erupted. Within seconds, security and medical staff were moving with trained precision. His pulse was erratic, dangerously unstable. "Cardiac failure," someone said sharply. "Now." He was rushed. Lights and sirens cleared by power no one questioned, to the family's private hospital. Machines took over what his heart could not. But Lucien did not wake. Back on the street, sirens cut through the night. Miriam was lifted onto a stretcher, blood soaking through her clothes, consciousness slipping in and out. Ilara clung to her hand. "Stay," she begged. "Please stay." Miriam's lips moved faintly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm still here." And somewhere beyond pain, beyond distance, beyond explanation, two hearts struggled together. One mother shielding her child. One man collapsing under a wound he could not see. Blood remembered. Connection answered. And destiny once again refused to stay buried. The doctors stood over Lucien's body in silence. Monitors showed rhythm, then uncertainty. Blood work came back clean. Scans revealed nothing alarming. No stroke, no trauma, no damage that explained the stillness. "He's not dying," one said carefully. "But he's not waking either," another added. They had no name for the state he was in. Lucien lay there, warm, breathing, heart-supported, yet unreachable. Neither alive in the way they understood, nor dead in any way they could prove. His mother sat beside the bed, her hands folded tightly as if prayer could be squeezed out of bone. She wept without restraint. "He was finally living," she whispered. "He was finally smiling." The machines answered with steady indifference. While medicine searched for explanations, Lucien was elsewhere. Not in darkness. Not in light. But in a place that felt like home remembered. Serafina stood before him as she had never been sick. Whole, unburdened, her eyes bright with the calm certainty he had missed more than breath. "You didn't leave," he said, voice breaking with relief. "I never did," she replied, smiling. Time did not move there. They did. They walked together, hands brushing, laughter easy. They spoke of nothing urgent and everything meaningful. The pain that had once defined her no longer existed. The heaviness he had carried for years lifted without effort. They lived together in that space, Simple, complete, enough. This is where I belong, Lucian said quietly. With you. Serafina stopped walking. She turned to him, tenderness steady but firm. You're needed, she said. No, he answered at once. I stayed when you left. I won't leave now. She reached up, touching his face the way she had in her final hours. I didn't leave, she corrected gently. I finished. Lucian shook his head. I can't go back. She leaned her forehead to his, the old gesture, the one that had once quieted her pain. Your heart is still working, she said. It's just waiting for permission. He pulled her closer. Stay, he whispered. Let me stay. Serafina smiled, sad, loving, resolute. You don't belong to death, she said. You belong to life. To the woman who carries my blood. To the mother who raised her. To the love that brought you back. Lucian resisted, not angrily but desperately. I've already lived my love, he said. I don't want another. Serafina held him tighter. Love doesn't replace, she said softly. It continues. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Miriam lay motionless beneath white sheets, machines breathing where her body struggled. Tubes traced quiet lines into her veins. The monitor above her bed pulsed steadily, but weakly. Alara had not left her side. Not when the doctors spoke in measured tones. Not when consent forms were placed in trembling hands. Not when the words internal bleeding and critical conditions settled into the room like ash. She held her mother's hand and prayed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She prayed the way Miriam had taught her. Silently, deliberately, with faith that did not beg but believed. When the doctors returned, their expressions were careful. She needs a donor, one of them said. Immediately. Blood compatibility is critical. Alara stood before the sentence finished. I'm here, she said. Take mine. They tested her. And again. Compatible. Relief crossed their faces, brief but real. As preparations began, Alara pressed her forehead gently to her mother's hand. You protected me, she whispered. Now let me protect you. Tears fell not from fear but from urgency. Hours passed. Alara signed everything. Answered questions. Allowed needles, scans, checks. Never once stepping away. Between procedures, she knelt beside the bed and prayed again. God, she said quietly, you carried us this far. Please, don't stop now. And then, without warning, Lucian crossed her mind. She hadn't heard from him since earlier. Not since he went to visit his mother after so many years apart. She reached for her phone instinctively. 1 missed call. 2. 3. No response. Her chest tightened. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. A strange unease settled over her. Not panic but a familiar heaviness, the same kind she had felt the night her mother was shot. Something was wrong. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand trembling. Please, she whispered, not sure who she was praying for anymore. Please let him be all right too. She returned to her mother's side, brushing back Miriam's hair gently, just as Miriam used to do for her. Outside the room, doctors prepared for surgery. Inside it, Alara held faith with both hands. For her mother. For the man she could not reach. For a connection she did not yet understand but felt tightening around her heart. And far away in another hospital, another life lay suspended. Unreachable. Silent. Waiting for the same blood to remember. 9 months had passed. 9 months since Lucian had been with Serafina. Living in a world she had carved for them both. Joyful. Peaceful. Complete. She had stayed close to him as she always did. Whispering to him in ways only he could hear, lingering in the spaces where memory and eternity overlapped. But Serafina's love was not selfish. It was deep, unwavering, and selfless. He wanted him to live. To return to the living. To fulfill the destiny that belonged to him, not just the echo of her presence. Yet Lucian had found peace in her world. For months he lingered there, choosing silence over life, presence over action. Even Serafina, though longing for him to go, could not rush him. Meanwhile, in the sterile stillness of the hospital room, Miriam stirred. The machines beeped quietly around her, a subtle reminder that life persisted even after trauma. Her eyes opened slowly. The first thing she saw was Alara, her daughter, sitting close by, holding her hand as though the entire world depended on that connection. Mama, Elara whispered, voice trembling. Miriam's vision blurred with tears. She pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, kissing her forehead, her hair, her cheeks, pressing her lips to every part of her she could reach. "Thank you, God," Miriam whispered. "Thank you, for letting me see you." Once she had settled, she spoke softly, almost dreamlike. "Elara, I had a dream." Elara leaned closer. "I saw Lucien," Miriam continued, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and worry. "He passed by my side, he was heading somewhere, not here, not toward us, gracious but determined, he didn't look back." Elara's hand tightened on her mother's. "Check on him, please," Miriam asked. "I will be fine. Go, see." A week later the impossible occurred. Lucien had been declared dead for a month. His funeral was solemn, the air thick with grief and disbelief. Friends, family, and associates had come from near and far. Black suits, muted voices, whispered prayers. The city's most powerful and powerfulest alike bore witness to his passing. Elara ran, her legs carrying her faster than thought. Her mother's soft voice tried to reassure her, but it was already fading behind her. "I'll be fine, Mama," she whispered, more to steady herself than to be believed. She reached for her phone, calling Lucien several times, but every attempt went unanswered. The rising panic clawed at her chest, yet she forced herself to breathe. There was only one place she could go. His office. The receptionist redirected her politely, but when she couldn't reach him there either, she was guided to his personal assistant. "He's not available," the assistant said carefully, "but you can have his mother's address. She may help you." It was miles away. Elara's fingers shook as she typed the address into her phone. She told her mother, who insisted she would be safe. But intuition, a pull she could not name, told her something was wrong. By morning she had arrived. The streets were quiet. Too quiet. The moment she saw the house, her stomach dropped. Something in the air pressed on her chest, heavy, unrelenting. She walked toward the entrance, only to be handed the location again, this time a stranger directing her with a solemn, almost fearful expression. She did not know yet what she would see. The doors opened. Everyone was dressed in black. Her bag slipped from her hand, scattering papers onto the marble floor unnoticed. Tears welled in her eyes before comprehension could arrive. It was a funeral. Her breath caught. Her knees buckled. And then she saw him. Lying in a polished casket. For a long moment, disbelief froze her. And then grief overtook everything. "Lucien," she screamed, her voice raw, trembling, cutting through the hushed hall. The mourners gasped. Some took steps back, stunned. The clergy began to protest. But she did not care. She ran forward, hands trembling, and flung open the casket. The moment she touched him, a shift rippled through the room. His mother and grandparents gasped, tears streaming. Others froze, unsure how to respond to a scene that defied everything they understood. "Lucien," she whispered through tears. "You never told me you would leave me." In that instant, somewhere beyond reason, beyond the veil separating life and death, Serafina spoke softly into Lucien's ear. "You must go back, for me. I love you. Until we meet again." Lucien's chest shuddered. His eyelids fluttered. The world returned slowly, first sensation, then sound, then vision. He blinked. The first thing he saw was her face. Tear-streaked, resolute, alive. "Elara." His voice croaked, weak but alive. His hand reached instinctively, brushing away the tears on her cheeks. She fell into him and he into her, wrapping her in an embrace that held every lost moment, every memory, every ache. They clung to each other as if gravity had shifted to make this single point, their reunion, the center of the universe. Some guests screamed. Some ran. The impossible had happened. A man had returned from the brink of death. Yet Lucien's mother, his grandparents, and his father approached slowly, eyes wide, absorbing the miracle, stunned but silent with awe. His father's hands trembled as he pulled Lucien close. "Pie's son," he whispered, disbelief and relief entwined. Lucien's mother wept openly, wrapping her arms around him. Grandparents pressed their hands to his back, still half afraid to fully believe. Even Naomi and her husband were present, silent, tense, eyes fixed on the reunion. Their daughters looked on, confused and uneasy, reaching instinctively to touch him but hesitating. Lucien did not see them. His world narrowed to the girl in his arms, the one whose courage and faith had pulled him back. "Ilara," he murmured again, holding her tighter. I'm here. I'm back." "I know," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, the same heartbeat that had faltered the night her mother was shot. "And you're never leaving again," she said, voice breaking though steady in its truth. The room stilled around them. Shock, awe, disbelief, grief, all paused. Life had rewritten itself in the span of seconds. Love, faith, and destiny had converged, and no one could deny what had happened. In that casket room, a miracle was no longer theory. It was real. Lucien and Ilara remained clasped together, silently communicating what words could never hold. And in that moment the past, present, and future aligned. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Lucien had awakened. Hospitals whispered it first. Then families. Then the city. A man pronounced gone had returned, and at the center of the miracle stood Ilara. People adored her openly now. Nurses smiled when she passed. Doctors spoke her name with respect. Family members watched her with quiet reverence, convinced they had witnessed something rare and undeniable, love strong enough to call someone back. Not everyone shared that joy. Naomi's younger daughter remained behind, claiming sudden illness. She clutched her chest dramatically, refusing to leave the house. No doctor was called. No tests requested. Her condition appeared only when Lucien's name was mentioned. She could not bear to see another woman occupy the space she believed belonged to her. The rest of the family went anyway. Naomi went. Her husband went. Lucien's parents, grandparents, and close relatives all insisted on visiting Miriam. They said it was about gratitude. About respect. About restoring what had been broken. The truth was heavier. At the hospital, the atmosphere shifted the moment Miriam's room came into view. She lay propped up against white pillows, fragile but alert. Her eyes softened when she saw Ilara step in, followed by the family that now surrounded her daughter with care. Naomi froze at the doorway. She could not meet Miriam's eyes. Her gaze fixed on the wall instead, as if the paint could shield her from decades of guilt. Her hands trembled slightly. No one needed explanation. Shame was written across her posture. Naomi's husband stepped forward. His voice broke as he spoke. "I didn't know," he said, eyes wet. "If I had known, I would never." He stopped when the truth struck him fully. Ilara. His daughter. The realization drained the color from his face. He sank into the nearest chair, hands covering his mouth as grief and regret collided. He whispered apologies that came too late, directed at Miriam, at Ilara, at a past he could never undo. The room held its breath. Lucien's family watched in silence. Their expressions were hard, disgust, anger, disappointment, but restrained. This was not the day for confrontation. Miriam's health mattered more than punishment. So they chose warmth. They spoke gently. They smiled for Miriam. They focused on Ilara, holding her hand, ensuring the room remained filled with calm and light rather than accusation. Ilara sat quietly beside her mother's hospital bed, her fingers intertwined with Miriam's. She kept glancing at the man standing across the room. Her father. Not the idea of him. Not the absence. But the living face, older, lined with regret, eyes too familiar to ignore. She had imagined him before. Many times. But nothing prepared her for the weight of seeing him breathe the same air she did. Lucien noticed the stiffness in her shoulders before she spoke. He moved closer, placing a steady hand over hers, grounding her without words. His presence no longer startled her, it anchored her. "You don't have to understand everything today," he murmured. "Just breathe." Miriam watched them quietly, strength returning slowly to her eyes. The family began to leave one by one, offering gentle words, promises to return, promises to protect. When the room finally emptied, peace settled in. A few days later, Miriam was discharged. Ilara cried openly as she watched her mother stand again. Unsteady but standing. It felt like a resurrection of its own. This time things were different. Lucien ensured security immediately. The house was watched. Movements were monitored. Questions were asked, quietly, thoroughly. Who wanted Ilara dead? And why? Answers did not come easily, but vigilance did. When the family returned days later, Naomi and her husband came too. Naomi's steps were hesitant. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering herself slightly, hands clasped. "I beg you, forgive me." Miriam said nothing at first. Forgiveness was not absence of memory, it was the refusal to let memory poison the future. But Naomi's daughter could not bear the moment. She turned her face away sharply, hiding it behind her hair, jaw clenched. The hatred in her silence was louder than any words. She could not look at Alara, not after what she had tried to do. The room tightened. Then Lucien's father spoke. "Calm, observant, measured. Not because we doubt," he said gently, "but because truth deserves clarity. I suggest a confirmation." He looked at Alara, then at Miriam. "I sense the same energy," he continued. "The same bond that once kept my son alive. Wisdom demands certainty." No one argued. Minutes later, a doctor arrived. A private medical van waited outside. The test was simple, swift, professional. They waited. When the results came, silence filled the room. Alara and Serafina were blood twins. Naomi's strength left her instantly. She sat down hard, hands shaking, face collapsing inward. Forgiveness had been offered once. Now truth demanded confession. "I did it," she whispered. Then louder, broken. "I switched the babies." Everyone froze. "My child was dead," she sobbed. "I couldn't lose everything. I couldn't survive it. So I took hers." Her words fell like stones. She wept openly now, not dramatically but emptied. Shame wrapped around her like a second skin. "I changed the records. I paid the nurse. I watched her mourn a child that was still breathing." No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Lucien tightened his hold on Alara's hand, not possessive but protective. Miriam closed her eyes, pain flickering once before settling into something quieter. Acceptance. Not peace, but truth. Naomi bowed her head, smaller than she had ever been. And in that moment destiny, once split by crime, finally stood whole. It did not happen all at once. That was the cruelest part. Naomi's empire did not collapse in a single scandal or public arrest. It eroded, quietly, deliberately, like a structure hollowed from within. Contracts were withdrawn first. Meetings were postponed, then cancelled. Calls went unanswered. Longtime partners suddenly found reasons to restructure, realign, or move in a different direction. Doors that once opened without knocking now remained shut. People distanced themselves, not dramatically but instinctively. Invitations stopped. Conversations shortened. Smiles became cautious. Trust, once broken, was not debated, it was withdrawn. Money followed reputation. Investments bled slowly. Legal fees mounted. Maintenance costs outpaced income. Luxury became liability. Assets were sold not to grow but to survive. Naomi watched wealth drain the way blood leaves a wound, steadily, unstoppably. Her health deteriorated with it. Sleep abandoned her. Meals were forgotten. Her hands trembled when she held a cup. Doctors prescribed rest, but rest could not reach a conscience burdened by years of deception. Her body began to mirror what her soul had long carried. The marriage disintegrated last, and most violently. The man she once stole no longer looked at her with desire or gratitude. Only resentment remained. They fought often, loudly, over money, over blame, over whose fault it was that everything had fallen apart. "You destroyed us," he would say. "You followed willingly," she would respond. Love had never lived there. Only convenience, secrecy, and mutual betrayal. When life struck hard, there was no foundation to endure it. They began to hate each other, not suddenly but honestly. Two people who had mistaken appetite for commitment, tolerance for love, and theft for victory now faced the truth. They were never meant for each other. And everything they built on another woman's pain returned to dust. The proposal did not come with spectacle. No cameras. No crowd. No carefully staged moment meant to impress the world. It came with truth. Lucien chose a quiet evening, the kind that carries weight because nothing is forced. Alara sat beside him, unaware, speaking softly about her mother's recovery, about ordinary things that now felt sacred. He listened, really listened. Then he stood. Not nervously but deliberately, like a man who had already survived death and knew exactly what mattered. "Alara," he said, his voice steady, "I have lived with power, fear, and silence. None of them healed me. You did. She looked up, startled, her breath catching. You didn't save me by pulling me back, he continued. You saved me by reminding me why life should be lived. He reached into his pocket, not a ring meant to dazzle but one chosen for meaning. I don't ask you to complete me, he said. I ask you to walk with me, truth beside truth, strength beside strength. He knelt. Will you be my wife? Alara could not speak at first. Tears filled her eyes, not from shock but from recognition. This was not destiny rushing her. This was destiny arriving prepared. Yes, she whispered. Then louder with certainty. Yes. Their families united not out of convenience but respect. Lucien's family welcomed Alara without reservation. They had watched her restore what wealth could not buy. They honored Miriam for raising a woman of integrity without bitterness. Miriam stood taller now. Not because money returned, but because dignity had. She was no longer introduced as a victim, a poor woman, or a forgotten wife. She was known as a mother who protected life with sacrifice and raised truth with empty hands. Power in Lucien's world shifted too. Fear was no longer its foundation. Secrecy no longer its shield. Truth became the protection. Contracts were cleaner. Alliances clearer. Loyalty earned rather than demanded. The empire did not weaken, it stabilized. And for the first time, love was not a liability. It was the center. Thank you for staying till the end. If this story moved you, tap like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments how it made you feel.